What happens when an undercover CEO discovers that a loyal janitor was fired after 30 years of hard work and decides to take matters into his own hands? Ethan Carter, CEO of Carter Industries, pulled into the parking lot of one of his oldest office branches. The morning sun glinted off the glass windows, but Ethan barely noticed. Something wasn't right, and he intended to find out why. For nearly 3 decades, this branch had been one of the most stable and successful in his company. But recently, employee morale had dropped, maintenance issues had piled up, and whispers of dissatisfaction had reached Ethan's office. The reports mentioned one thing in common: the absence of someone named Walter Grady. Walter had worked as a janitor in this building for 30 years. Known for his quiet demeanor and dedication, Walter had been a fixture in the company, the kind of employee people didn't always notice, but whose absence left a void. Yet when Ethan asked his regional manager about Walter's departure, he was met with vague excuses. Budget cuts, restructuring, not enough value. None of it sat right with Ethan. Today, Ethan wasn't walking in as the CEO. He wore faded jeans, scuffed boots, and a worn-out jacket. Today, he was just Tom, a maintenance worker starting his first day on the job. Inside the building, the once welcoming environment felt colder. Employees moved quietly, faces tense. Ethan couldn't help but notice dust gathering in corners, trash bins overflowing, and light bulbs flickering, things Walter never would have allowed. In the maintenance room, Ethan was assigned to work with Luis, a part-time custodian who appeared overwhelmed. "You the new guy?" Luis asked, his tired eyes barely meeting Ethan's. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "Name's Tom." Luis handed Ethan a mop. "Good luck keeping up," he muttered. "Since Walter left, it's been a mess." "Walter?" Ethan asked carefully. "What happened to him?" Luis paused. "No one knows the full story. One day he was here. Next day, gone." He shook his head. "They say corporate let him go. Budget cuts. But..." Luis hesitated. "That guy worked harder than anyone. He was this place." "Nobody asked why," Ethan pressed. "Oh, people asked," Luis chuckled bitterly. "The boss, Mr. Dwyer, shut it down fast, said Walter was old news." Ethan's chest tightened. Walter had given 30 years to this company and had been tossed aside like nothing. Throughout the morning, Ethan worked the maintenance shift with Luis. He mopped floors, cleaned bathrooms, and emptied trash bins, all while noticing how disorganized things had become without Walter. In the break room, employees whispered about Walter, how he'd show up before anyone else, quietly fixing things no one noticed until they went wrong. "Walter knew this building better than anyone," one worker said. "He'd patch leaks before they became floods, fix wiring before outages happened. He kept this place running." "Yeah," another employee added. "And he remembered everyone's name." "He used to fix my kid's bike when I brought it in," one woman chimed in. "Never asked for anything in return." "So why'd they fire him?" Ethan asked, pretending to be curious. The employees fell silent. Finally, one muttered, "Ask Mr. Dwyer. He's the one who pushed Walter out." Later that afternoon, Ethan found Mr. Dwyer in his office, feet kicked up on his desk, sipping coffee. "Hey," Ethan said casually. "Heard there used to be a guy named Walter here. What happened to him?" Dwyer chuckled coldly. "Walter? Guy was old, slow, and didn't know when to retire." "But 30 years on the job?" Ethan asked, feigning ignorance. "That sounds like dedication." "Dedication doesn't mean efficient," Dwyer said smugly. "We needed to trim the fat. Walter was just dead weight." Ethan gritted his teeth. Didn't seem like his co-workers thought so. "His co-workers didn't sign the paychecks," Dwyer snapped. "Walter was nothing special, just a janitor." Ethan's blood boiled. "Just a janitor?" he repeated, his voice low. "That janitor spent 30 years keeping this place running, so you didn't have to." Dwyer smirked. "Relax, buddy. Walter's old news. We'll get by without him. We'll see, Ethan muttered, turning to leave. He knew what had to be done. That evening, Ethan tracked Walter's address through company records. The modest home was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. Paint chipped from the shutters, and an old truck sat unused in the driveway. Ethan knocked. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing Walter Grady, a weary man with deep lines on his face and sadness in his eyes. "Can I help you?" Walter asked cautiously. "I'm from the company," Ethan said. "I wanted to check on you." Walter sighed, shaking his head. "I don't need pity." "It's not pity," Ethan insisted. "I just want to know what happened." Walter reluctantly stepped aside and invited Ethan in. The home was neat, but small, a reflection of a man who had worked hard his whole life without ever demanding more. "I gave everything to that place," Walter said quietly, staring at a framed photo of his wife, now deceased. "They fired me 2 months before I was set to retire, said they couldn't afford to keep me." His voice trembled. "I wasn't asking for much, just enough to finish strong." "You didn't deserve that," Ethan said softly. "No one does." "Doesn't matter now," Walter muttered. "It's done." "Not yet," Ethan said firmly. "I'm going to fix this." Walter chuckled sadly. "You can't fix being forgotten." "Yes, I can," Ethan promised. "And I will." As Ethan walked back to his car, one thought burned in his mind. Tomorrow, Mr. Dwyer would understand exactly how important Walter Grady really was. The next morning, Ethan Carter arrived at the office dressed sharply in his tailored suit. Gone were the worn-out jeans and scuffed boots. Today, Ethan wasn't Tom, the maintenance worker. He was back as CEO, and he wasn't about to stay quiet. The staff turned their heads as Ethan walked through the building with purpose. Whispers followed him, and word quickly spread. The boss was here. Confronting Dwyer, Ethan didn't bother knocking when he reached Mr. Dwyer's office. He pushed the door open, catching Dwyer mid-coffee sip. "Mr. Carter," Dwyer stammered, nearly choking. I didn't know you were visiting today." "That's the point," Ethan said coldly. "We need to talk." "Of course," Dwyer said, forcing a smile. "How can I help you?" "You can start by explaining why you fired Walter Grady," Ethan said. "Because from what I can tell, it wasn't about budget cuts." Dwyer's smile faded. "Walter was inefficient," he said slowly. "Look, he was a good guy, but he was getting slower, missing things, and, well, he was expensive for what he did." "Expensive?" Ethan's voice rose. "He worked here for 30 years. He knew this building better than anyone. And you fired him without notice, 2 months before retirement." "I was just looking out for the company," Dwyer defended. "We needed to cut costs." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You were looking out for yourself. Walter wasn't just a janitor. He was the foundation of this place. And you didn't just fire him. You took away his stability, his pride, and his dignity." "Look," Dwyer said smugly, "Walter's gone. He'll get over it. The company will move on." "You're right about one thing," Ethan said icily. "This company will move on, but without you." "What?" Dwyer's smugness vanished. "You're fired," Ethan said coldly. "Get your things and get out." Announcing change with Dwyer gone, Ethan gathered the staff in the main conference room. Employees filed in anxiously, unsure of what was coming next. "I know this company hasn't felt like itself lately," Ethan began. "And I know some of you are angry about what happened to Walter, and angry about what this place has become." The crowd murmured quietly. "Walter wasn't just a janitor," Ethan continued. "He kept this place running. He made sure your desks were clean, your lights were working, and your offices were comfortable. Walter gave this company 30 years, and what happened to him was unfair. So what happens now?" someone called out. "We fix it," Ethan said firmly. "Starting today, Walter Grady is coming back if he's willing, and not as a janitor. Walter will return as our building operations supervisor, a role he's more than earned. The room erupted in applause. Employees smiled, whispering to one another, clearly relieved that Walter's dedication was finally being recognized. And one more thing, Ethan added. If anyone thinks they can mistreat employees the way Mr. Dwyer did, you don't belong here. This company isn't just about profits, it's about people. Finding Walter that evening, Ethan returned to Walter's home. This time, when Walter answered the door, Ethan didn't waste any time. "Walter," Ethan said with a smile, "I want you to come back." Walter blinked in surprise. "Come back?" "Not as a janitor," Ethan said. "As our building operations supervisor, with better pay, full benefits, and the recognition you deserve." Walter shook his head. "I don't know. I'm too old to start over." "You're not starting over," Ethan said gently. "You're coming back to lead, to teach others what you've spent 30 years mastering." "This place doesn't work without you," Walter's voice broke. "You really mean that?" "I do," Ethan said. "And so does everyone back at the office." Walter smiled faintly. "All right," he said. "I'll do it." The next morning, Ethan personally walked Walter back into the office. The staff was waiting in the lobby, and when they saw Walter, they erupted in applause. "Welcome back, Walter," someone called out. Others rushed forward to shake his hand. "Told you," Ethan whispered to Walter. "This place needed you." Walter grinned, his shoulders straighter than they had been in weeks. "Feels good to be back." Over the next few weeks, Walter settled into his new role. Employees respected his knowledge and came to him for guidance. Maintenance issues were resolved faster, the building's energy improved, and most importantly, Walter felt valued. Again. One afternoon, as Ethan was leaving, he found Walter quietly cleaning a picture frame in the lobby. A photo of the original Carter Industries team from nearly 30 years earlier. "Couldn't let the dust cover this one," Walter said with a smile. "No," Ethan replied. "Because people like you're part of this company's history." Walter wiped his hands on a cloth and turned to Ethan. "Thanks for giving me another chance." "You earned it," Ethan said. "I'm just sorry it took me this long to see it." Walter smiled, his eyes shining with pride. Better late than never. Walter's return to Carter Industries had been met with applause, but as the days passed, the excitement wore off. The building was still in disrepair. Employees were still tense, and Walter quickly realized that stepping into a leadership role wouldn't be easy. Despite his decades of experience, Walter wasn't used to giving orders, and some employees weren't ready to respect him in his new position. On his first official day as building operations supervisor, Walter called a meeting with the maintenance team. The staff shuffled in, chatting quietly among themselves. A younger janitor named Chris leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, clearly unimpressed. "All right," Walter said, clearing his throat. "I know things have been tough lately, but if we all work together, we can get this building back in shape." "With all due respect," Chris interrupted, "I've been busting my back since you left, and I've been doing fine without you." "I know you've been working hard," Walter said calmly. "But this isn't just about working harder. It's about working smarter." "Smarter?" Chris scoffed. "I don't need someone telling me how to mop a floor." "It's more than that," Walter replied. "Leaks are spreading, the wiring's bad, and the air systems are failing. If we don't fix those now, we're going to have much bigger problems." "Yeah? Well, maybe if you'd done all that before you got fired, we wouldn't be in this mess," Chris muttered under his breath. Walter's face hardened. "I gave 30 years to this place, and I'm here to fix what's broken," he said firmly. "If you want to keep ignoring the problems, that's your choice. But I'm not letting this building fall apart." Chris glared at him but said nothing. More. The tension in the room lingered as Walter dismissed the meeting. Walter knew actions spoke louder than words. Over the next week, he arrived early and stayed late, working alongside the team. He unclogged drains, rewired faulty lighting, and organized neglected supply closets. Slowly, employees noticed how quickly issues were being resolved. One afternoon, Chris found Walter alone in the basement, knee-deep in tangled wires, trying to fix a circuit issue that had been causing constant power surges. "You're wasting your time," Chris muttered. "We've tried fixing that twice." "Then you weren't fixing it the right way," Walter replied, voice calm but firm. "Give me a hand or stand aside." Reluctantly, Chris stepped in, holding a flashlight, as Walter carefully reworked the wiring. Within minutes, the flickering lights above stabilized. "How'd you do that?" Chris asked, genuinely impressed. 30 years, Walter said simply. "Experience teaches you what shortcuts can't." Chris nodded quietly. "Guess I've got some learning to do." "We all do," Walter said with a small smile. With Walter back, the building's transformation was undeniable. Leaks were repaired, the air systems ran smoothly, and the employees, once frustrated and disconnected, started to feel a sense of pride in their workplace again. Walter's leadership went beyond fixing pipes and patching walls. He made sure employees felt heard, asking what they needed to improve their space. He worked closely with the cleaning crew to reorganize their schedule, ensuring no one was overworked. Slowly but surely, Walter was piecing everything back together. One afternoon, Ethan watched as Walter stood with Chris and the team, laughing over a cup of coffee. The tension was gone, replaced by respect. "Told you he was the heart of this place," Ethan muttered to himself. A week later, Ethan called the staff into the lobby for an unexpected announcement. Employees gathered curiously, murmurs filling the room. Walter stood quietly at the back, unaware of what was about to happen. "I wanted to take a moment to recognize someone who has given more to this company than anyone realizes," Ethan said, scanning the crowd. "Someone who spent 30 years quietly holding this place together and never asked for anything in return." Walter's brow furrowed in confusion. "Walter," Ethan continued, "can you join me up here?" The room burst into applause as Walter stepped forward, clearly stunned. "Walter," Ethan said warmly, "you've spent your life giving everything to this place, and now it's our turn to give something back." Ethan handed Walter an envelope. "This is a bonus, compensation for all the overtime hours you never claimed. And," Ethan smiled, "there's something else." A few employees stepped aside to reveal a large brass plaque now mounted on the lobby wall. It read, "Walter Grady, 30 years of dedication, loyalty, and service, the heart of Carter Industries." Walter stared at the plaque, speechless. His eyes glistened. I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You've already said enough," Ethan replied. "This is just our way of saying thank you." Walter wiped his eyes as employees cheered once again. For the first time in a long time, Walter felt something he thought he had lost: pride. Later that evening, Ethan found Walter standing quietly in front of the plaque, running his fingers over the engraved letters. "Looks good," Ethan said softly. Walter chuckled. "Never thought I'd see my name on a wall like this." "You've earned it," Ethan replied. "This place wouldn't be the same without you." Walter smiled faintly. "You know, I almost gave up on this place. Thought no one cared." "People cared," Ethan said. "They just needed to be reminded why." Walter nodded, his eyes still fixed on the plaque. "Guess I'm not done here yet, huh?" "Not even close," Ethan grinned. "We've got a lot more work to do." In the weeks following Walter's return, Carter Industries had undergone a transformation, not just in maintenance, but in spirit. The building that once felt cold and distant now buzzed with warmth and camaraderie. Employees stopped to greet Walter, and even those who once doubted him now sought his advice. But while Walter's impact was undeniable, Ethan knew something more had to be done. Something that would ensure Walter's years of dedication were never forgotten. One afternoon, Walter approached Ethan's office. He shifted nervously in the doorway. "Got a minute?" Walter asked. "For you?" "Always," Ethan said, motioning him inside. Walter sat down, rubbing his hands together. "I've been thinking," Walter began. "There's a guy named David, used to work in maintenance years back. He left when his wife got sick, needed to take care of her full time. I heard things have been rough for him since. You're thinking he could use some help? Ethan asked. Walter nodded. He's a hard worker and a good man. I know we're hiring. Figured maybe you'd consider giving him a shot. I trust your judgment, Ethan said. Let's set up a meeting. 2 days later, David arrived at the building. His clothes were clean but worn, and he carried himself with the quiet humility of someone who had spent too long feeling like a burden. Walter greeted him warmly. Good to see you again, Walter said, clapping David on the back. Told you I'd look out for you. I don't know what to say, David muttered. I haven't worked in a while, not sure I'm the right fit. I'll help you get back on track, Walter promised. We'll take it one step at a time. Over the next week, Walter worked side by side with David, showing him the ropes, guiding him through tasks, and reminding him of the skills he'd once mastered. Soon, David was thriving. Employees noticed his dedication, and Walter's mentorship earned him even more respect. Walter's not just fixing the building, one employee whispered to Ethan. He's fixing people too. Ethan knew Walter's impact couldn't be measured in tools or repairs. It was in the way he brought people together. Determined to make Walter's influence permanent, Ethan began to plan a surprise. 2 weeks later, Ethan called a company-wide meeting. Employees gathered in the lobby, murmuring curiously. A large black curtain covered the wall near the entrance. Before we get started, Ethan said, I want to recognize someone special, someone who spent 30 years dedicating himself to this company and made this building feel like home. The crowd turned toward Walter, who stood near the back, looking puzzled. Walter, Ethan called, come on up here. Walter hesitated before stepping forward. Ethan gestured to the curtain. You've done more for this company than we could ever repay, Ethan said. But this is a start. With that, Ethan pulled the curtain away, revealing a newly installed plaque that read, The Walter Grady Community Room, dedicated to 30 years of service, kindness, and unmatched dedication. The crowd erupted in applause. Walter stared at the plaque, his eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know what to say, Walter stammered. You've already said enough, Ethan replied. This is just our way of saying thank you. Walter wiped his eyes and shook Ethan's hand. I never thought this place would feel like home again, Walter said quietly. You made it that way, Ethan replied, and we're better for it. That evening, as Walter was packing up his tools, Ethan approached him one final time. Hey, Ethan said, handing Walter a small envelope. One more thing. Walter frowned as he opened it. Inside was a check far larger than he expected. What's this for? Walter asked, voice trembling. That's your pension, Ethan said. The one you were supposed to get when you retired, plus the back pay for all those overtime hours Dwyer refused to honor. Walter's voice caught. I don't deserve this. Yes, you do, Ethan said firmly, and I won't hear otherwise. For a long moment, Walter just stared at the check. Then quietly he said, Thank you for seeing me. We should have seen you sooner, Ethan replied, but we'll never forget you now. The next morning, Walter's plaque greeted employees as they walked in, a permanent reminder that dedication, kindness, and hard work mattered. Staff often stopped to admire it, some quietly sharing stories about Walter's impact over the years. And Walter, he stood taller than ever, not just as a supervisor, but as the heart of the company he had spent his life caring for. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because standing up for what's right can change someone's life forever.